Welcome, everybody. You'll see we are joined by Emil, who will be giving us a little presentation on Emil and Hanzi's take on technology and AI in an hour. So, how did people get on with pre-reading for this week? I mean, I am aware that I set quite a lot of pre-reading, so I'm not expecting that you necessarily read every word, but anything that particularly caught your attention?
Definitely for me, Buterin's My Techno-Optimism. It felt like, in talking with a lot of people around just the general sort of effective accelerationism, it felt very young in terms of an approach to things, like something based more off of cerebration rather than experience. And Buterin's piece was really refreshing for that. It felt to me like there was a lot of nuance in terms of the practical realities of how things play out in the world. I'm still not so sure on the transhumanism side, but yeah, that was my sort of take.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, useful reflection. Anyone else want to offer any initial reflections on the pre-reading?
Just share that I watched the Schmachtenberger video, and that was just incredible. Like that video, it was amazing. So
No, this was the one I put in the Telegram group, I guess.
Yes.
Which was I think it's also later down in the notes stock, but that will be this one, from A Vision for Betterment on the Great Simplification podcast with Nate Hargens. Yeah, he's a very eloquent chap. There's no doubt about that. A few more people in the waiting room. Oops. I'll just get these guys in and then get going, I guess. So welcome to week 2 of Technological Metamodernism. As before, I'm going to spend the first hour or so just like going over some of the key ideas for this week. Again, I'm going to be going over this stuff quite fast. I'm aware of that. It's more, it's not intended to be like a comprehensive display of all of the ideas from this week, but hopefully I'll say enough that you understand what's interesting to you, what feels most important to you, and then you can go away and do some extra reading on those ideas afterwards. But the title of this week is Metamodern Takes on Technology. The story so far is that, okay, well, we laid out there's this kind of impasse between the techno-skeptics and accelerationists. We saw how what are called decels and doomers and long-termists, although there is they have their own kind of argument going on with the accelerationists. In many ways, they're actually part of the same family. And then the question is like, what does metamodernism and what can metamodernists like bring to the table? Is there some like transcending and including move, some synthesizing move that can help us get beyond the relative stuckness of the debate on technology featuring those previous 3 tribes? So I've collected a list here of what I consider some metamodern, or we can certainly say like proto-metamodern for some of the earlier thinkers when it comes to technology. Disclaimer, I haven't read all of the books featured here in full, but I've done enough research to feel very confident that what is listed here is relevant. Some of the things that I have read and made an impact on me, actually many years ago, Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, which has more of a kind of economical, like green economics lens to technology, where the term appropriate technology was coined. More recently, I read Ivan Illich's Convivial Technology, which is I think a deeper and slightly more tricky like concept to understand, but he's pointing towards technology which is like understandable and an aid to human creativity rather than something that is just contributes to this the overall complexity of society and takes away jobs that actually or work that actually humans sometimes quite enjoy doing. Then moving on, so Langdon Winner, for example, is heavily featured in some of Daniel Schmachtenberger's work. So in reading Daniel's work, then you get an idea of what Langdon Winner has been in saying. Then so Kevin Kelly, Gerard Lanier, Tim Thornton, Timothy Bratton. And then I guess the work which I'm most familiar with and I think is actually most relevant is unsurprisingly the more contemporary work. We've encountered, well, in pre-reading you encountered Daniel's work. We encountered a bit of James Bridle last week. And then some, and we're also going to be speaking of Vitalik's work this week. Now, and some of these other thinkers we're actually going to encounter even later in the course, particularly in the final session, where we consider like some of them, like the most practical applications of this work and this course to developing metamodern AI and metamodern DAOs and such things. But yeah, feel free to dive into any of the books and works listed here if there's anything that catches your eye. I guess the important part is like it's metamodern technology there's something of a lineage here that stretches back at least as far as like the turn of the or the switch of the 19th to 20th century and maybe even further. So the first essay that was featured in the prep and I want to spend some time on is this technology is not values neutral, ending the range of nihilistic design, published June 2022 by the Consilience Project, who actually I know is more than just Daniel Schmachtenberger. So apologies, even if anyone here worked on this essay, it's conceivable. However, like I do understand Daniel to be a good part of Consilience and his thinking to be key in this essay. So what's it all about? So in this article, we propose that there are inevitable and unexpected impacts of technologies on both the human mind and society as a whole. Fair enough, pretty obvious. For most of history, the process of tech design has either assumed that such second and third order effects do not occur or that tech innovation is net positive. So this net tech innovation is net positive. That is the kind of techno-optimist perspective. This that comes into the effective accelerationist worldview. So we'll look in a bit more detail about this, what he calls technological orthodoxy soon. And lots of people arriving. Just clicking some admits. So this essay argues that at this moment in history, it's essential that we adopt an approach to design that accounts for how tech affects the way people think and behave. This is axiological design, axiology being the philosophical study of value. Tech affects power dynamics in society, forms ecologies and habitats, shapes the thoughts, values, and relationships of those using it. We must start to take tech seriously before it changes our world in ways that may not be easy to repair. So what are we getting at here when we say that, like, well, for just taking the phrase in the title, technology is not values neutral, or this phrase here that tech affects the way people think and behave? So there are some examples actually kind of spread throughout the document, that three that I've collected here. So one is that the plow that led to certain forms of animal domestication, and the argument is that moved or helped to move religious beliefs from animistic to theocentric. It's very difficult to worship the sacred spirit of an animal that must be beaten all day to pull a plow. So the plow actually changed human values vis-a-vis animals. Another is the car that it said here has had a profound impact on humanity's perception of time and space, determined how we built our cities and which places were valued and which were not. Gives us an entirely new sense of what it means to be near or far, or like part of a community or part of a neighborhood. And So that's obviously wonderful in lots of ways, but at the same time, cars have disconnected people from local economy and community, generated harmful emissions, and had a major impact on health and well-being. Final example, smartphones were designed with the values of communication and access to information in mind, but an inevitable result of enabling communication at a distance is a change in how humans value face-to-face interaction. Instant messaging has come to replace in-person contacts as the default modality of communication. A GPS device on your phone can get you where you need to go, but it was not designed to weaken your sense of direction and make you dependent on it to feel safe in real urban or rural areas. Yet it also does that. What value is there in now having a good sense of direction, or being able to give and remember directions and locations? So an important part of this, of what the position that's being laid out here is not just that technologies embed and encode and shape human values. It's also, and we'll see this more in a second, that to an extent, the way in which those technologies shape values are relatively foreseeable, or at least foreseeable to some extent. Right? The suggestion is that if we had been interested in, how might the smartphone like change human values and change the kinds of maybe skills, and also that humans are good at or feel are worth continuing to value, then we might have been able to foresee the fact that it would have an impact on our sense of location in our sense of direction in this example. So the article makes the case that technology is currently being developed under this so-called technological orthodoxy, which is an idea of Langdon winner, the principles of which are laid out here: comprehension, control, neutrality, and progress. Probably the most important one in this context is this neutrality one, that technologies themselves are neutral. Technological benefits and harms depend on how humans use them. It's a very common refrain to hear about technology in the last couple of decades, I would suggest. Now, this is, and so in this essay, it lays out 4 approaches to design. Now, what it doesn't do, but what I've done here, is kind of loosely associate them with stages of development. So naively optimistic design, and the proposal of this essay is it's emerged during early modernism, assumes that positive values are intrinsically encoded into all technology human interfaces. So that will also be familiar to us from looking at the kind of this reboot of it in the form of EAC. So Luddite design, which I would you could maybe say is like kind of an early postmodern reacting against the machine age, assumes that negative values are intrinsically encoded into all technology human interfaces. So actually, this is in one of Hanzi's essays. Hanzi actually, I think, do I have the quote here? Let's see. No, I can't quite remember exactly where it is, but that is how Hanzi kind of characterizes like a postmodern reaction to technology. Sorry, let me just go back to where we were. However, I think just is, you can also make a very strong argument that the dominant kind of postmodern flavored reaction or like position on technology is what's called in this paper nihilistic design or technological orthodoxy, which is actually not the position that technology encodes like negative values, but that it's more that just that it ignores or downplays value as an aspect of technology human interfaces. We'll look at that more in a second. And then the paper presents ideas on axiological design, and which I would say, I'm making the case, is like a kind of metamodern approach to technological design. So a design that factors and leverages the intrinsic value inevitably encoded in all technology-human interfaces. Let's get past that part. So I know that some people had some questions on this this section here. So this is actually added like just recently after I had a conversation with Rufus Pollock some hours ago. Rufus said this interesting phrase. He thought that wisdom makes technology more values neutral. And what I understand he means by that is that the wiser that we are as like kind of individual human beings, and possibly society as a whole, the more true technological orthodoxy actually is. That is to say, the more true it is that that technological benefits and harms depend on how humans use them. So the example is that if you're really wise, if you're really smart, you may or may be able to choose to consciously limit your social media use to maintain real world relationships and it not be and so that social media is not like an isolating force in your life in the way that it is for many people. So, and I think this is an interesting point, that yes, as we're going to see, like we should really pay attention on the values encoded in technology and like really considering those well in advance and considering how technologies are likely to shape culture and society. And also, it is the case that like if human beings just generally become wiser and more discerning, they will be able to make more intelligent choices about how we use any new technology. So suggesting a both and approach here. So let's both like kind of engage in axiological design to be very careful about like how and why we're creating technology, and also work on improving human wisdom and discernment through kind of inner development processes, as a kind of complement to also attempting to create technology in a new way. Like if humans generally become wiser, then even if we kind of get it a bit wrong, like in terms of the dynamics of the technologies that we've created, then human wisdom almost acts as a bit of a backup, we can say. I mean, another perspective is that, and also I think of an important one, is that these things are co-evolving. That there's that like human wisdom and the technologies that we're making are in this reciprocal relationship. Okay, sorry, I forgot to pause to take any comments or questions. So let me pause there for a second to see if anyone has anything to say. Is George with us? Because I know George wanted to add something at some point, but don't see him right now. So I'll continue for a bit more in that case. Okay. So I mean, this ultimately for me, this paper, as important as I think it is, kind of begs a question, and a really important question. So it suggests that, okay, well, we should be aware that technology shapes human values, that we should, well, as it says here, and as it says here, overcoming nihilistic design requires changes to frameworks, approaches, and methods at a fundamental level. This will necessarily involve a shift away from seeing engineering as primary and values and ethics as secondary. Instead, technologists might hold ethics as the fundamental priority in the design process. If we dig in a little bit deeper into like why exactly is nihilistic design, or this technological orthodoxy, this idea that like technology is values neutral, like dominant at the moment, there's two parts to it here. There's firstly the line that we've covered, so the position that we've covered, that are people saying, oh well, technologies are only as bad or good as people that use them. arguably there's a second, even more important part to this line of thinking, which basically is, well, what even is value? Like, isn't value just like kind of culturally constructed? This is a postmodern stance, like that isn't value culturally constructed and kind of arbitrary, and like thus it's not very important to consider it actually any time, anywhere, like including when it comes to technology. And actually just seeking to is downplay the concept of value, skeptical to universal values in general, is how we might characterize the postmodern position, which like really is an important part of why nihilistic design has been dominant. Technological orthodoxy entails a strict separation from values from technology. In part, this is related to understanding value itself as primarily socially constructed. This idea began with modernist scientific materialism. The assumption that physical matter constitutes all that exists leaves no room for subjective qualities such as value. This idea that value is purely subjective reached its climax with the postmodern expressions of skepticism towards all universal frameworks of value. I said this begs a question. The question that it begs for me is like, okay, what exactly is value, or what are we really talking about when we say value here? Because that isn't something that this paper goes that much into. Although like so far as we all have some intuition around it, I think it's very persuasive in making the case that like that technology does encode values and that we should care about that. But I think it's useful to go a bit deeper into like what exactly are we talking about when we speak about value, and what kinds of things might we hope that we could start to design our technology for or in support of. So some good work on value that I've come across, starting with more than a decade ago, actually, with the Common Cause Foundation, they've actually made a number of different publications. The most eye-catching is this values map. This values map is based on the work of someone else who's very well known in the field, which is Shalom Schwartz, and they kind of cluster like similar families of values, and then give those different kind of continents, if you like, of the map, like different like labels to apply to like a whole family of values here. And Common Cause have been very active in working with NGOs in the UK, at least. That's how I came across them. Suggesting that NGOs should be really, really careful about how they fundraise, for example, because if the fundraising campaigns, well, you might find there's a fundraising campaign that draws on people's sense of security and power and conformity and tradition. And it might be very effective in the short term in getting people to donate money to that NGO. But what you might actually be kind of undermining the longer term cause or the greater cause. If that greater cause, for example, is some universalist cause about protecting the environment, you have to be very careful about just taking short-term actions that actually might be pushing values kind of south in this map, if you like, because ultimately you're actually gonna need those the values up the top of this map to sort of achieve your deeper aim. And I found that very extremely thought-provoking when I came across it at the time. So another organization I think is doing great work around values is the Meaning Alignment Institute that we met last time. Their paper that did feature in prep also, what are human values and how do we align to them? So they are adopting, their approach is fascinating for two reasons. Firstly, that they're actually using kind of AI systems to help people uncover their values. And secondly, that they're actually seeking to surface what they call the wisest values in a population without relying on an ultimate moral theory. They're actually trying to use democratic mechanisms to, which is what this image is suggestive of, to kind of understand if there are values that kind of dominate others, that some values are kind of strictly higher or wiser in some meaningful sense than others, which I think is very likely and very useful work, and fits actually with a kind of developmental paradigm of like metamodernism, seeking to transcend and include the insights of earlier stages of development. Their work is inspired by Charles Taylor, who wrote this well-known book on values, sources of the self. And then this is all I chose these also because this is all kind of quite contemporary work. And the last piece of recent work around values that I thought was very eye-catching was this book, First Principles and First Values, which is written by David J. Temple, and David J. Temple is the pen name of three folks: Mark Gaffney, Zach Stein, and Ken Wilber himself, the kind of originator of integral theory, of which was a big inspiration to metamodernism in its current form. So they what have we got here? It's got a pop-up requesting you to start meeting questions. Okay. This is quite a different beast to the previous two, and whilst these two are kind of more based on we could say research or democracy, First Principles and First Values is, we could say, like as much based on something spiritual or transcendental. And I think there's value in that as well. And actually Rufus Pollock was pointing to this a bit last week. He's obviously very inspired by Zen Buddhism and makes the case of like there are wisdom traditions that stretch back thousands of years that have like done a lot of thinking about this, that have passed down systems of values. In the Buddhist sense, for example, we could think about the Brahma Viharas, so metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, empathic joy, and upekkha, equanimity. And that like we can and we should pay some serious attention to values encoded in these like religious and wisdom traditions. I think probably the right approach is a mixture of these three things, but I'm happy to include David J. Temple's work here as an example of a kind of more modern attempt to kind of synthesize a set of values that is, or at least inspired by wisdom traditions. If you want to, as a spoiler, this is what they come up with actually in the book: uniqueness, eros, intimacy, desire, relationship, evolution, harmony, personhood, freedom, story, and integrity. Now, it might sound a little bit arbitrary just to read off that list, but the book is worth a read because they make a good case through a method that they call let's see, is it called the anthroerotic method? I forget the name exactly now, but like that certainly tells a good story, at least, by why these values are somehow more important and more significant than others that you could come up with. Gaffney has this very good Substack under the name the Center of World Philosophy and Religion, and Zach and Mark have just finished running this course called Value is Real: Why Saying This Clearly May Save Our Civilization and Our Souls. So hopefully they, oh, maybe it's going, maybe it's happening right now. It's this September. So hopefully they do that again. I would actually like to attend. Okay, so that's intended to fill out a little bit more about like what we're actually talking about when we speak of value, or some of the places that we might start to look. If we become convinced that yes, indeed, like we should really consider the question of value seriously when we design technology, that constitutes, so far as that constitutes some kind of like metamodern approach to technological design. Okay, let me pause there for any comments or questions. I think I did see George join us this time. Is that correct? Seems like no, maybe. Oh yes, George, there you are. Yeah, George, I know that you had some things to say about Daniel's papers. Like, so I've only spoken about the first one at this point. The technology is not values neutral. I'm about to speak about development in progress. Shall I speak a bit about development in progress now, and then I can get you in, or would you like to chip in now? George? No, okay. Well, let me speak about the second paper now, and then I'll call you again and see if you want to like make your contribution at the end of this section. Okay, so development in progress. The second paper, which essentially, well, the first part of which argues essentially that pervasive negative externalities of technology have been the rule rather than the exception. Yeah, which is, and I think they make a very good case that's unfortunately been the case with many of our technologies over the past few centuries. The example that they go into in detail in the paper is the Haber-Bosch process, that on the surface produced an endless supply of food, but comes with all kinds of negative externalities that they go into quite harrowing detail on here, related to human health and the biosphere, civilizational structures, and so on. And this to me is part of a kind of metamodern approach to technology. Is like it's akin to this kind of deconstructive move, if you like. It's being willing to really come face to face with all of the bad shit that actually technology like has done, for society or to society, and not be being willing to like really look at that in detail before we start coming up with potential solutions and responses. Like the solutions and responses that we might come up with are almost necessarily going to be insufficient unless we've really got to grips with the depths of the problem. And the problem, I think, is quite, by framing like the problem as progress, and our notion of progress, I think is very apt, actually. And essentially we're going like all the way down there. But in this, right now, I'm not going to focus too much on like the actual critique of progress. I'm actually going to focus more on the latter part of the paper and some of the sort of okay, what now steps that this paper presents. So they come up with this list for prudent problem solving. Well, I actually kind of spoke to this in a way just those last few minutes. But essentially, it's a list of steps that intended to essentially put people off actually developing a new technology. Ending with, only if a legitimate problem remains and no viable solution has been found after following all of the steps above, then begin to explore what might be involved in the invention of something new to address it. If the conclusion is that a new tool or project is truly necessary to address a legitimate problem that cannot be resolved with an existing approach or technology, the next step is yellow teaming that we'll come on to. But the essential position here is that if rather than or if we really accept the case that technology, like, very often or almost always comes with pervasive negative externalities, like, we should actually seek to avoid, if wherever possible, the creation of technologies, just because it's a really tricky thing to get right, to be sure that the narrow problem that you're fixing is not going to create harm elsewhere. So yellow teaming, this is inspired by the concept of red teaming. So whilst red teaming attempts to ensure a plan doesn't fail, yellow teaming attempts to ensure it doesn't cause unexpected harms or problems elsewhere. So the classic example of red teaming is like computer hacking. Like, so before you, I mean, it's happening a lot with AI systems, like all the big AI companies have red teams that before they release a new AI model to the public, they will have a red team within the organization, or sometimes external to the organization, working to kind of break it and make it fail, or make it say like crazy or dangerous stuff for, you know, some weeks and months before they are satisfied enough that it's or satisfied that it's safe enough for general consumption. But yellow teaming is something a bit different, and this paper actually phrases yellow teaming and synergistic design that we'll look at shortly as approaches to axiological design, the design paradigm, which we mentioned previously, which is really based around questions of value and how technology encodes values. So there's in this paper there's some examples of opening high-level yellow team questions. Now, I would say what would be useful to make explicit here is that these are yellow team questions, like, based on the value of a biological life, we could say. And I think it's slightly disingenuous actually to sort of not mention that explicitly. I mean, maybe in reading the questions it becomes obvious, but like, for me, yellow teaming doesn't actually make sense unless you're saying like what values you're seeking to design for. So if we start to read something, you know, what must be extracted from the biosphere to bring your product into being? What might the associated costs of this extraction entail? Does your product make use of chemical substances with known impacts on organic life or biological systems? It becomes clear from reading these questions that these questions are like have a certain set of values kind of encoded into them, which I agree with. But like part of but axiological design is not bio-inspired design necessarily. You know, like, it might be if like, for all of us, if collectively we all decide in this group that, well, we really value biological life, but it isn't necessarily so. Like, for me, axiological design, yellow teaming is actually a bit more general than that, which I think could have been made a bit clearer in this paper. Synergistic design, something a little bit different, solutions to problems that address multiple needs at the same time. So I think it's easiest just to get into the case studies that are offered in this paper, one of social media and one of regenerative agriculture. So they come up with some ideas of how we could do social media differently. How else might we design these algorithms if we were aiming to upregulate the most worthy and holistically beneficial content? One possibility is to retrofit social media algorithms to upregulate content with most positive sentiment across ideological divides, so that social media started to become a tool for helping people, build bridges, or find commonality in apparently opposing positions, as opposed to what's happening now, which is algorithms tuned for profit, and then a downstream consequence of that optimization for profit is this division that we see. Another example of synergistic design in this paper is given as regenerative agriculture. When we take action to improve topsoil, the plants that grow from the land are improved as a second order effect, positive externality. At the next level, the humans and animals consuming these plants too benefit too, as they're no longer consuming the toxic residues from pesticides and so on. So actually 2 great films on regenerative agriculture that I can highly commend to you, Kiss the Ground, and then its sequel, Common Ground, that's only recently been released. I've got both really good feel-good films that actually also really start to give people a taste of what we're actually speaking about when it comes to synergistic design. Okay, let me pause there again. And George, are you with us this time? Maybe George is having problems with, oh no, there's 2 Georges on my screen. Okay. George, you said you wanted to say something on this topic. Would you like to have a go now?
I have some technical difficulties. I will fix it in a few minutes and I will be back. Okay,
no problem. Yeah, we'll give you some time, like after Emil has spoken, then towards the end of the session now, to give you some time to sort that out. Okay, anyone else want to make any comments or pose any questions on the content so far?
I'd have something if I...
Yeah, please.
I think it's something that is, I guess, quite close to my heart as someone who's trying to make a metamodern venture right now is, it seems to me as if this yellow teaming approach can, and the design criteria that we have with it, can be, at least to me, cognitively overwhelming. And there's a way in which we can get, like, I guess a good analogy would be stuck in the regulations of the European Union, as an example, and so as to not get startups of any meaningful scale up in Europe, as opposed to in the US, where they don't really have these regulations. So I hope that so take this analogy of like, oh, like, are we already constraining us to the point where we don't do anything where we cannot create any positive, meaningful impact whose externalities we can then later on, with the added value that we've generated, address?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, I think what I hear in your question there is Moloch. If you're familiar with this concept, this idea of game theoretic traps, that, like, when you say, like, oh, like, you know, yellow teaming seems a bit overwhelming, isn't that kind of what's going on with the EU relative to the US, where, like, US startups are more free to regulate and can kind of innovate quicker, and then they are first to market, or then they scale quicker. Like, there's 2 ways of looking at that, isn't there? There's, like, well, that one conclusion you can draw is like, so Europe should regulate companies less, or the other conclusion is, so the US should regulate companies more. But then, of course, like, the Molochian dynamic is like, well, like, you know, they say, well, China isn't going to regulate their companies more, so you know, so we shouldn't regulate our companies either, and it becomes a kind of race to the bottom of regulation, and concepts like yellow teaming are kind of then thrown out the window as like too complicated or too expensive or like uncompetitive. Now, there's no doubt this is a really, really important dynamic around a really, really tricky problem to solve. And we're actually going to be looking a bit more about that next week, or looking, including like this, the idea of coordination failure in the form of this, the myth of Moloch. I mean, one solution which is mentioned in the development in progress paper, which is kind of boring, but I think also really important, is just regulation, and actually like harmonizing regulations across borders. Like, it's not a very sexy thing to talk about, but like, it probably will continue to be really important. And like, probably, and in the context of AI, for example, like, probably there should be some kind of international regulatory body equivalent to the like international, like atomic energy authority, I think it's called IEAE, isn't it? That actually is kind of as regulating AI as across as much of the world as possible. Now, also, I think it's important to recognize the limitations of a purely regulatory approach and understand that companies will opt out or try to opt out or like develop in secret and so on. So then we also need to ask what else can we do? What else is on the table? What other mechanisms might be able to like bind the behavior of states, but actually not just states. I think it's important that we say what, look at it at a multi-level approach of like how can we bind the behavior of states, but also maybe communities and individuals themselves. So that's also something that we'll look at in the next session when we come to in the context of actually of like the Eleusinian mysteries and ancient mystery cults as like something that was certainly outside of like the state apparatus that did seem to be a way of still like binding people's behavior. So thank you for bringing that up, Jacob. Daniel, you had your hand up there. Is there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say with yellow teaming, it does seem like there's the part, as you mentioned, where you have to make explicit the values that you're looking at. But then another element of yellow teaming seems to be around cognitive bias, where any of the places where you can use it to augment the places where we typically fall down in missing things, whether that's the externalities or other pieces. It feels like there's a values neutral component to yellow teaming that can be kind of added in there in that way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's the values neutral part and like the vibe of axiological design is very much like just fucking slow down, just really slow, just really think and think really carefully about like how this technology is likely to change things, no matter what you value. You might value something completely different to me. However, still, let's just really think about this carefully, which is like kind of antithetical to like much of like current like tech culture, this like move fast and break things and like ask, what's the phrase, like ask for forgiveness rather than permission, this kind of vibe. And the paper is suggesting like we can't do that anymore. Like our technologies become so impactful on society and environment and so on that like we can no longer, like asking forgiveness means ask after you've you've killed X million or billion people from that technology going wrong nowadays, and it's ceased to kind of be a kind of viable, certainly like ethical option. Chris, do you have your hand up there?
Yeah, I'm just have a maybe curiosity or just set the stage a little more, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can say to address also the issue of the fact that there's like hundreds of thousands of people like from developing nations mostly that are like trying to do tech things just in order to escape poverty, right? And it's like everything that we're talking about, like in some ways, I don't know, how can we expand that? Like, can we address this? Like, yeah.
Well, I think that like the axiological design is not ultimately, it is ultimately a kind of is kind of cautiously like encouraging of technology. It's like, okay, yeah, there are certain technologies that we should make and that are worth designing, and probably many of those actually are would have positive consequences for the poorer people in this world. Probably axiological, a process of yellow teaming would find there's a whole load of shit that's happening in the rich world that really shouldn't be done, and actually is creating more harm than good. But probably, there's the converse of that is like probably there are a whole bunch of really of technologies that would do a lot of good in some of the poorer parts of the world that currently aren't getting built because of like certain market dynamics. But I think there's I'm glad you brought that up, because when I guess it's true that when I've been speaking of the tech industry, when I have in my mind is a kind of rich white Western tech industry, and it's worth acknowledging that certainly the tech world is increasingly much broader than that, and there are many talented companies like working in poorer parts of the world and in the global south that are probably also inspired by, in some ways, quite different value sets, although they're also likely to have been influenced by the kind of Silicon Valley mind as well. Jacob, let's take your point briefly, and then we'll cover some of Vitalik's work.
Yeah, I think Chris pointed to something that I was incoherent, like I wasn't able to get out just before, because this EU-US thing was actually just an analogy. I think the point that Chris is also talking to, or what comes up in me, is that who is able to slow down? Like who has the capacity to have their whatever essential physical needs met through passive income, as an example, to actually think about these things. And here I sense like there are some companies where, at least, or some people also who have the impression, at least, that they have to go fast enough, they have to make enough sales in order to be able to even exist as a company, and then think about these challenges. I think that was more what I was trying to point to before.
Okay, thanks. George, okay, let's hear from you. There's still quite a lot on the notes that I wanted to cover, so if you could keep it as brief as possible, that would be welcome.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, but
Do you hear me now?
We can, but I'm not sure how good the signal is. Let's try.
Do you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so I just quickly want to reflect on Jakob's question of who has the agency to slow down the development of AI, or for that matter, for any other technology. And because I don't want to take too much time, so I just want to remind you guys that in our Discord channel, not on Discord, on what Telegram, we are using Telegram. I entered a message with a link to a Google Doc where I address this very question, which is about reflecting on some of the very interesting points from the technological evolution is not, technology is not neutral, from the Consilience Project paper. And basically, Schmachtenberger or whoever wrote that piece, they are suggesting that the good things, that we should do this and that. But the same question is not addressed. But Jakob is asking, who has the agency to do that? And my point that I outlined a little bit more in my Google Doc, you can look it up if you are interested, is basically that technology that we have now is a product of blind evolution. Simply the market forces were driving the development of technology. And the wishful thinking that if we can change our values, if we can, who is the we? It's a psychological perspective that the Consilience Project suggests, that we should change from engineering first to values first. Yes, but the sociological mindset, which is asking exactly who has the agency to do that, is not addressed. So this is my focus, that I don't want to spend more time on. Whoever is interested, please go to the Telegram channel and click on the link, which is to the Google Doc, where you can put comments there and questions, and I would be very curious of your feedback.
Awesome, thank you so much, George. And I'm going to just mute you again. Oops. Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind that the Consilient's work is, incomplete, we can say, and that there's plenty more to say about it and plenty more gaps to fill in. And this question of agency seems like an important path to walk down. I'm going to cover just a little bit of Vitalik's work as well. So the, I mean, as it said here, so yellow teaming and synergistic design are approaches to axiological design, or that's what Consilients are claiming. I'm going to claim that DAC is also a kind of axiological design. So the D standing for defensive, decentralization, democracy, or differential accelerationism. And I would say that this is Vitalik's attempt to like design for the values of what we could call freedom, independence, sovereignty, or autonomy, with a dose of democracy or coordination or collective action. And I think, like, politically, my read of Vitalik is that he's like somewhere here on the political compass, if we wanted to place him there, like strongly libertarian, which is what kind of this stuff is about, and like somewhat sympathetic to collective action, which puts him kind of slightly on the left of things. And it's important to say that he's certainly much more techno-optimistic than Daniel and the Consilients project from the start. And he makes that clear. My own feelings about techno-optimism are warm but nuanced. He ends this paragraph with, we need active human intention to choose the directions, that is, of technological development that we want, as the formula of maximized profit will not arrive at them automatically. So from the beginning of this essay, he's clearly making a distinction between his position and the kind of the EAC position, which was kind of embracing the thermodynamic will of the universe, or maybe more relevant would be to say the kind of the thrust of the techno-capitalist machine to like just take us to where intelligence needs to go. No, I think it's clear that Vitalik maybe we could say he's aware of the kind of is-ought problem in a way that some of the effective accelerationists seem not to be. So he has this cartoon with this bear, the anti-technology or Luddite view. Safety behind that castle is supposed to be kind of at the the bottom of the path. We were at this lovely safe castle, and then through developing technology, we're moving towards this like dark, scary castle. The accelerationist view is that there's something scary behind us, and that like all we need to do is kind of run as fast as possible to get to the pretty castle, the safe castle in the distance. And then Vitalik's view says that, well, there's a bear behind us, there's dangers behind us, but there's actually multiple paths forwards. There's a fork in the road where either we can get to like the happy place or the dark place, depending on the decisions that we make now. Now, something for me, this actually quite closely maps onto a different framework of Daniel Schmachtenberger's, which is the third attractor framework that some people might be familiar with. So this project, which I kind of started off with two colleagues and haven't actually spent much more time on, is this third attractor Instagram project, where we created 3 alternative visions for London under 3 scenarios: the kind of dystopian authoritarian scenario, a kind of catastrophe scenario, and a kind of solar punky third attractor scenario. So we can kind of map those futures onto the bear cartoon, if you like, of saying that, well, if we do nothing, then kind of by default things fall apart, that there's a fork in the road that leads us to a good place, but another fork that leads us to a kind of dystopian place. That's actually kind of just a rotation in my mind of the third attractor framework. The third attractor instead looks at it as like, we're walking a tightrope, and on one, if we fall off on one side of the tightrope, we end up in an authoritarian dystopia. We fall off on the other side, we end up in catastrophe. So it's like, yeah, sorry, catastrophe on the left and dystopia on the right. But like, if we successfully make it to the end of the tightrope, then we end up in the kind of, you know, this kind of third attractor scenario. So just making an additional, like, just small correspondence between Vitalik and Daniel's work there. I'm actually not sure that they are aware of each other or each other's work at all. I actually have messaged Vitalik on Warpcast to try to make him aware of Daniel's work, and I didn't get a response. If anyone is in contact with either of them, yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd love to. Well, I'd love to hear actually a conversation between them at some point. Let's see. Actually, just this. And there's another phrase that kind of backs up the one that we had from before. Vitalik says, it is intentional action coordinated through public discourse and culture, shaping the perspectives of government, scientists, philanthropists, and businesses, and not an inexorable techno-capital machine that has solved these problems. And by these problems, he's speaking about climate change and other environmental problems that he sees, that he frames as like an exception to the trend of pretty much everything getting better over the last 100 years, which is very, very different to the development in progress paper, which is like much more skeptical of the benefits of you know, technology more broadly. Vitalik kind of restricts his criticism of technology to like just the impact it's had on the environment, so which I think you can question, but so his kind of proposed way forward is what he calls defensive accelerationism, like so like promoting technologies that favor defense. The intuition pump that he offers for this is Switzerland, where he says, or makes the case that it's the closest thing the real world has to a classical liberal governance utopia where huge amounts of power are devolved to provinces. How can a country like this survive extremely challenging political pressures? Part of the answer is excellent political strategy. The other major part is its very defense-favoring geography in the form of its mountainous terrain. So this is just intended to be a kind of playful analogy of it's like what is the equivalent of mountainous terrain in other like areas of culture and society, and can we make it? Can we make other areas of life like kind of easier to defend, and like within that like defensive bubble for healthier, more open, and more freedom respecting behaviors to evolve, we could say. Now, I think you can actually question the actual very notion of defensive technology, or defensive technology being meaningful. I mean, that's acknowledged to some extent in the article itself by Vitalik. Basically, any technology can fall on both sides of the spectrum, as it says here. Nuclear weapons are offense favoring, but nuclear power is human and flourishing favoring and offensive defensive neutral. There's actually a similar point made in the Technologies Not Values Neutral article, saying that certain technologies have been considered as an intrinsically decentralizing or centralizing, but this is not true, is the claim made in that paper. Digital technology, for example, was thought to be intrinsically decentralizing, but then in China, we've seen like a relatively centralized system that has enabled high levels of social coordination. So, I mean, to the extent that this makes sense and that you can make a distinction between defensive and offensive technologies, then Vitalik kind of goes into much more detail about 4 classes of defensive technologies, which we don't have time to get into now, but please go and check it out in the paper if you haven't already. And in their own way, these technologies are all intended to be in service of the values of what do we see up here? You know, like, yeah, freedom, autonomy, democracy, coordination. So it's a thoughtful accelerationism. We need to build and accelerate, but the very real question needs to be asked is, what is the thing that we're accelerating towards? Reminds me of Rufus's horse from last time. Can we find a way towards a future where we retain our freedom and our agency? And I'd say that, you know, he mentions freedom and agency here, that because that's what Vitalik values, and fair enough, that's what Vitalik values. I value those things as well. But the broader point I would suggest from like, and one of the most important points from this week is just like, what is it that you value? Well, firstly, what is value? What is value? And then after we understood that to some degree, what is it that, you know, that you value and I value, and like, then, and only really having really got to grips with those questions, those more fundamental questions, can we start to ask the question of, okay, so what technology like can or should we design that are actually in support of those values? So that's, you know, there's a kind of philosophical underpinning to even, you know, before we get to the questions of actually designing technology. Okay, I don't have time to go into the work of Cosmos Institute here, but this is like a brand new organization that has some really interesting grants programs and like a fellowship program that is very much aligned with the content that we've seen today, is specifically focused on AI rather than technology in general. And they're opening a new lab at the University of Oxford, supposedly the world's first initiative to translate philosophical principles of human flourishing into open source software and AI systems. So, you know, cautiously optimistic about this. Seems like good news to me, and seems like certainly other people are like picking up on this need to think much more carefully about the philosophy of technology at this time. The values, they're quite explicit about the values that they are kind of designing for. So they call them the 3 pillars of AI and human flourishing: reason, decentralization, and human autonomy. And I have a suspicion we're likely to sort of see kind of more of this going forwards, and see more organizations and more companies be more explicit about the values that they hold and the value and what they're designing technology for, in a way that we haven't so much under the technological orthodoxy or kind of nihilistic paradigm. Okay, any final comments or questions on that last part before we invite Emil to the stage? Okay, Emil, well, welcome. So in the past hour, I've laid out, you know, some thinking that I think it's like plausibly metamodern in its attitudes towards technology. And now we're going to hear Emil's take, and maybe Emil, you can explain 1 minute at the beginning on the connection between you and Hanzi, who's also featured as a guest this week.
Well, I've been listening. So you're not doing any breaks. You raw dog 2 hours.
Well, we would usually, but like it's, you know, time is getting on. So let's just go.
Okay. Well, my name is Emil Ejner Friis, and I am Hanzi Freinacht, the great Hanzi Freinacht's representative here on Earth. And well, I'm originally a historian, and I'm what you could call a theory artist, wordsmith, and I'm also a guitar player. So I'm here to represent Hanzi because well, it said in the description, you know, what's the question? What is Hanzi Freinacht's take on technology? Well, he doesn't have a cell phone, and he is using a typewriter, which is a step up from the handwritten notes that we need to work with in the past. So he's a very conservative when it comes to these kind of things. And actually, am I also, you know, I'm always the last person to install some app. If okay, I'm gonna install it in the end. I'm also a bit of a technology pessimist. And especially when it comes to AI, I think it's a scary technology. And It's not because, well, I am afraid of Terminator. You know, it's just a matter of time before we are going to have autonomous killer drones. Like, it's an attractor point. Every government on Earth would want to have that technology. But what I'm more afraid of is that before we get these killer drones, Terminators, whatever, we will have gone batshit crazy, bonkers. Yeah, just think about what happened with social media. It's pretty simple technology. Yeah, like it's kind of like weird when you think like, why didn't anyone think of that? Well, some people thought about it in the 90s, but anyway, that okay, I can read text messages and watch pictures from someone else, and we can all watch it. You know, it's just like, okay, it's a very simple technology. And the consequences of this simple technology is that we have a rampant mental health crisis on our hand among young people. Yeah, this stuff is more addictive than cocaine. Yeah, and some people have compared it like this is the cigarette of our age. Yeah, 50 years ago, like everyone was smoking and they got bad lungs, and some they died of cancer. I would prefer that to what we have now, especially when I worked in a well, I was there one day, then I quit. I worked in a school, never gonna go back to that place, like the horrors, but I've seen the consequences. Yeah, and I think, you know, we're reading about that. It's really, really bad. Imagine what's gonna happen when you add AI into the mix. Yeah, like we can already see some of the results. They're calling it like brain melt, like AI brain melt things. I've seen like there's some like really, really creepy guys out on YouTube announcing that, hey, this is a way to make a quick buck by making like AI generated children's programs. Yeah. And, you know, like stressed out, oh, we just need to like entertain the child. You go to YouTube and then you give them like some cartoony stuff. And then it's just like this AI generated brain melty. Like, it's fucking scary. So I think that we will, like, the mental health crisis that we have now is going to get worse, much worse, before we will pull in the guns and go at the people who are responsible for this. Yeah, because the problem is that we have profit-seeking individuals. Like, it's not like a corporation. A corporation, you know, there's a board and all that kind of stuff. Like, we have like single individuals. Yeah, like little dictators. Take a guy like Mark Zuckerberg. Like, what is his greatest idol? Caesar. Yeah. It's kind of like these guys, you know, these guys who are like complete fan of Scarface. Like, they don't get the movie. It's about, he dies in the end. The guy is miserable. He gets a miserable fucking life. And then you have like all these like immature boys who want to be like Scarface. Okay, we also like, okay, I'm a historian. I know what happened to Caesar. Yeah. It ended poorly for that guy. But anyway, these are our technological Silicon Valley overlords. They have what they have done is that they have seized the platforms of the digital society. They're kind of a little bit like the railway barons back in the 19th century. You had like a handful of guys that just got a monopoly on all railways, and they got ridiculously rich. And then in the 20th century, people were like, okay, fuck, you know, like we have like a handful of crazy billionaires who have a monopoly on the crucial infrastructure of industrial society. And then they got nationalized. Well, today we have a handful of billionaires who owns the critical infrastructure of the digital society. And it is an attraction that this is just not sustainable. It's just a matter of time before people, governments, are gonna gang up and get these guys. And we already see that the French Republic, Macron, they've done a little experiment. Yeah, like, you know, they have taken like a lower tier one of these guys, like the lowest of the lowest, like the guy who made Telegram, you know, just like a little fly. But anyway, it's like a little test. So like the guy who made Telegram, you know, he's also Russian, you know, so like makes it easier. Let's just see what happens if we take him out. And again, I see that the likes of Elon and Zuckerberg at some point, like governments are just gonna take these guys out. But then the question is like, what are we going to do with these platforms? Like, how is it like, are we going to nationalize Facebook and Amazon and these things? And the answer is that no, nationalization is a 20th century thing. What we need to do is to transnationalize the means of communication. Yeah, seize the means of communications. And if anyone is interested, I don't know how much time we have. I've made like a little presentation. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the model of hierarchical complexity that we teach at my like super long courses. That can, if you give me access, Stephen, to share my screen.
Go ahead.
So let me see here, share screen, advanced portion of screen. Let me see. No. Can you see my screen? Oh, there we go. It's on my other screen, all these screens. And then I'm gonna make that smaller. Exactly. So there's this universal problem of epistemic corruption, which is the distortion of perception and or communication due to power relations and self interest. And if anyone is like epistemic, it comes from epistemology, which is like relating to knowledge, how we acquire knowledge. And you know, when we talk about epistemic corruption, it's the corruption of our shared sense making. Yeah, and we all have heard this term, like we're in the middle of a meaning crisis, sense making crisis, and all that. And I'm going to show you where it's derived from and what it has to do with this platform monopolies that we experience. So, but let me start with one question. So, why are dictatorships so bad, and why is democracy so good? And now I'm going to see the can I see here? Can I see? I'm going to see on my other screen. No, I cannot see you because there's like you can press the little. How do I get to see people? Why do they keep? This is also one of the things I have with technology. That is that you have all these board engineers and UX designers, and they just keep changing. There we go. Show them. No, there we. Okay, let me see. I just wanted to see you guys here on ones. Can you can still see my screen?
Yeah,
now
yeah,
I can see you. Yeah. I can also see myself. I don't remove the, I don't know. Anyway, so now I can see if you raise a hand. Anyway, why are dictatorships so bad and why is democracy so good? And the answer is, of course, that dictatorships fall victim to epistemic corruption, while democracy is created specifically to counteract it. You know, like, you know, in a communistic dictatorship, like one of the problems is that that you choke all these information feedback cycles that, you know, the market and a free press would otherwise provide, and then in the end things just like start falling apart. You know, when you live in a la-la land of lies and I don't know how much time I want to go to. Like, I just want to see like how many people know about the MHC, the model of hierarchical complexity. I know that we have a Jacob. I know that George, he knows about it. I see that Scott, and then I can't see anymore because I can just see like a big fat picture of myself here. Anyway, so this is also like one of the like just check it out. Model of hierarchical complexity is a theory about everything. If you're interested in stage theories, if you're interested in complexity, this is the go-to theory. However, let me show like on the one of the basic stages here, like order of complexity, level 9, concrete. That's where you find the individual. We don't believe in the individual, but yeah, it's basically the same thing, like the singular person. And that, on this basic stage of complexity, you have a person who organized their life according to a coherent life story. And there you have agency. However, the next stage, like on order of complexity stage abstract, you have the group, which is a context environment. For example, a group is created, but like the moment we get stuck in an elevator, there's a group, and now there's a we, and we all want to escape the elevator, and a group has its own dynamics, but it doesn't like do anything in itself. It's first when it becomes an incorporated group on the next stage of complexity, stage formal, and there you have agency again. People get stuck in the elevator, and then they create, let's call it Escape Inc. And they nominate a CEO whose job it is to get people out of the elevator, and they can now act legally as one entity. And the interesting thing is, like, this is how pre-modern states work. Before we had the modern state, a state was basically like a company. The kingdom was the king's property, and he ran it like a company. Like, the state didn't have it, like, it shouldn't provide like services to people and have like all these layers layers of institutions. It was basically just the king's property to make a living, make a buck. However, there is a level above the pre-modern state, or the incorporated group, that is namely the platform, right? And this is an order of complexity 12, systematic. Please, I know I haven't taught you the MHC, but you can look it up afterwards. I'm like fast forwarding through this, but I really want you to get the point here. Now, platform, that is where the platform, you shouldn't take that too literally, but this is basically the level of complexity where you find the market, civil society, like you find trade associations and so on. And, the Catholic Church is also kind of like, a platform, in the same way that the Holy Roman Empire of Germany back in the Middle Ages were also kind of like, a platform. And then you have, on stage 5, you have the state. And there you have agency. Like, like a platform doesn't have agency in itself, right? Like a trade association, or like civil society. It's not in itself. It's the people and like groups using, incorporated groups using the platform that have agency. But here we have the state. And the modern state is per definition that which organizes and defends the autonomy of all 4 before it. Individuals, which is, and you have groups, and then you have incorporated groups, and then you have systems or like platform. And think about it, when we talk about our liberal rights, rights of that, okay, of course, like as an individual, human rights and all that jazz. Then groups, like stage 2, well, this is where you have freedom of assembly. And then incorporated group, this is where you have like private ownership, like freedom of enterprise. And then on the platform level, this is where you have like markets, and media, and education that, in a modern state that we all have rights to. And the state's job is to organize all these levels. Now, what happens, and this is the typical one, if one of these levels colonize the other. For example, that the state gets colonized by an individual, a dictator. You see, you get epistemic corruption when suddenly this level of complexity needs to adhere to the interest of one person. Yeah. And for all these levels, you can find like a different, you can also, for example, if it's a group, you have, more like an oligarchy. What we see, like some places like where you have, corporations taking over third world countries, for example, more or less. You also get epistemic corruption. And you can make like all kinds of combinations here. What I want to show you here is that we have this platform level, which usually it's like the job of the state to protect the workings of the various platforms out there. And now they're all like many of these. We think about civil society and where we've like the democratic discussion. It's all going on online. These platforms, like more and more of this stuff is online, and it's been taken over by whom? Corporations. Which, and if we take Facebook for example, here you have an incorporated group which has, it's kind of like a lot of criticism within Facebook is that, this one guy, he doesn't want to let go, like a modern corporation should be governed by a board of directors and so on. However, we see that in many corporations that you have like one guy who's basically the dictator. And you can say, hey, I established this company. But it leads to epistemic corruption when everyone around this dictator in a corporation, like everyone is just, kissing his ass and, surrounded by a lot of yes men. Many companies have gone down because of, this kind of epistemic corruption. So the point I want to make here is that it is not quite so bad as a dictatorship where you have, an individual taking over a state, because you see that there are like three stages between, but it's bad enough that the platform has to adhere to corporations and individuals' interests. And now I'm going to fast forward. We don't have so much time. The solution is not like nationalization on this level. It is transnationalization. And what we need to create is not like a planetary state, because like the state is on this level of complexity, but cross-paradigmatic agency that coordinates all the paradigms of the world that's in the world, that makes multiple state models possible, and complements. So we have like, you should more think about planetary governance. My idea is like, I have some more slides here. Exactly. Seize the means of communication. And it's also like in the book, like the listening societies, that which minimizes epistemic corruption. And that which minimizes epistemic corruption is that which also universalizes the nature of will. Now, that was a bit, usually this presentation, I spent like maybe like 1 hour or something like that. So I just want to hear if you have been, are you picking up my point here? That it's a problem that we have corporations that are often, been like the dictatorships of like single individuals and their interests that have colonized the platforms of our society. And obviously they should not be like, the platforms should be out in the commons somehow. And the solution is not nationalization, but transnationalization.
I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about what that transnationalization would actually look like.
Yes, very, very good idea, because maybe we should think about where to start. Because like with transnationalization, it's obviously not like one government that should say, okay, then, this is just the property of the United States of America now, because it's on America. All these platforms are on American soil. Which would you, but like, again, why wouldn't it be like, if it comes to this point, why wouldn't it be in the United States self-interest to just nationalize these platforms and not ask anyone? Yeah, that is because we are in the middle of a Cold War right now, and we like to think of ourselves as the good guys, the free world, all that jazz, against the bad guys in Russia and China and Iran. And what we see now is like we see the emergence of several internets. Yeah, we have like the big Western internet that started it all. But but many people don't think about it. We have like a completely insular like internet in China, and countries like Russia and Iran, they also want to create their equivalent of course these internet should abide to their values and so on. So in the same way, like I can tell you a little about the world situation now that we're in for hell of a time because the American fleet is not capable at protecting the world's oceans any longer for trade and so on. The Bretton Woods system that was set up after the Second World War to like get everyone to bandwagon with the Americans, told like the Europeans, that the French, the German, the British, okay, if you stop waging war on each other and colonizing everyone, we will give you access to the world's markets. And the only thing we want in exchange, that is that you join our alliance. Now, this we see that, okay, it's still holding together like in relation to Ukraine. However, America, it's actually not in America's interest to spend all these resources on keeping everyone safe. Like Europeans have to do it on their own. However, it would be in America's interest that their internet, like the one they invented, the Western free internet, is the one that wins this Cold War. So the only government that would be able to do something about these platform monopolies is the US government. It's on their soil, and it's like the Europeans can't do much about it. However, just like the Bretton Woods system that was set up, like the Americans didn't create like a new like empire. They invited people along, and then like the Europeans like could also have their say, and they had the World Trade Organization, IMF, and all that. And what I envision is something similar to that. That okay, we are going to take these platform monopolies out, and then we're going to put them out in the transnational commons. Yeah, so that we will have people, and we will have like from all over the free world, everyone who abides to our democratic values will be allowed in and will have a say in how this should be governed. And then of course we should have like experts and good people who people who will structure and build these platforms so that they serve the greater good and not just serve corporate interest. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that it should be put out in the commons, and these commons should be run transnational. Yeah. So we should have like
the closest organization that currently exists, which seems to represent that coalition of interests, is maybe NATO. So we're switching from like Facebook to NATO book. I think
we check like Wikipedia, for example. Yeah. I think Wikipedia is a good example. There are also like governing structures. And they have like how to govern this whole thing, and it's like it's run transnationally. Yeah. And you also have organizations such as like the World Trade Organization, IMF, which is they're like super like Euro-American centric. It's like the Europeans and the Americans are running the show. However, we should obviously have organizations where people also from the global South are invited in, and it's kind of a way that the American can still fulfill this mission to spread democracy and free world and all that, but without boots on the ground and and spending a shit ton of money on a fleet. And the thing is that if you run these platforms, which are going to be more and more important, and your country starts doing something stupid like invading your neighbor, well, you will not, and your citizens will not have access to these all important platforms anymore. That's really, really hard soft power.
So what I'm hearing is that this is a kind of Bretton Woods 2.0, or like
exactly
the equivalent projection of power to the kind of military projection of power in the previous century will now be around the transnationalization of these digital platforms, and I hear that like you're suggesting that at some point the United States will realize that is actually in its interest to do. Yes. So I'm hearing that like you think it's somewhat of an inevitability that the US government, and then the EU and so on, will realize that actually that we just need to do this, and like we're just going to deal with Elon and Mark Zuckerberg and whatever, and do whatever it takes to actually take these platforms like under our collective control.
Yeah, because I mean, okay, it was kind of cute when Facebook could arouse a revolution in the Arab countries, or a little genocide in Myanmar and so on. But it's not cute anymore when these platforms are suddenly deciding elections in the US and are inciting civil war. Yeah, like these platforms are a security risk, and then people have realized that, governments have realized that. And it's like pretty easy. Like, okay, you just need like 5 armed guys just to waltz into Twitter. And no, and people like joking, what are you talking about? Guys, Facebook has been like the direct cause of genocide. It can do that. Imagine what it can do with AI. Yeah. And I also I'm looking like Elon, and I don't know if any one of you are still on Twitter, but when I log in, like the 6 first posts are from Elon, even though I've unfollowed him. And it's just a lot of like it's like it's an open goal. He's going down. Yeah. Like I think Mark Zuckerberg is much more difficult because like he knows how to play the games. Like Elon is like very autistic about like human interactions, and but I know a lot of people like, what are you talking about? They're so powerful. Well, they're powerful until they aren't. Yeah. Like the French king was powerful until his head got fell off. And we are talking about we like, I live in a country like, well, you live in this country too. We're having Russian fighter planes violating our airspace. Yeah, there's a war going on. Hundreds of thousands people are just like dying. It's probably gonna reach like million at some point. We have an armed insurrection, like kind of armed, like an insurrection in the United States, like a few years ago, like. And this is just the beginning, guys. So in such a chaotic, in such a chaotic world, and where we see these technologies going to cause even more damage, yeah, is it that unrealistic to imagine at some point a government is just going to say, you know what, fuck you guys? And I mean, what are they going to do?
So I've got one more question before we then open it up to comments and questions from everyone else. But so you've so far been speaking at like, I think like in a very fascinating and useful way, like this like really big picture is kind of like level of states and sort of like transnational dynamics and so on. But I'm curious if you or Hanzi has anything to say about the kind of the levels lower down, if you like, which is actually what the rest of the content in the session was more directed to, about like what is the role for well-meaning, metamodern-minded individuals and organizations and so on in the context of this, you know, that kind of transnational story? Like what can we do, or what might we be thinking about? How might we be changing our behavior as people that are actually creating technology or involved in creating technologies?
Oh yeah, well, we need to take very good care of ourselves, and be ready for the long haul. And then it's about positioning ourselves well, and to be in strong networks, get to know other people, so that, you know, when shit hits the fan, when things go down, that you're ready to act. Yeah. And imagine, you know, in a world where like people are like realizing, okay, we need to transnationalize these platforms, and governments like, yeah, okay, we need to do something about that. But what? Well, obviously, the tech-minded metamodernism should be like, well, I actually know what to do. I've thought it out. So, like, keep an eye on the situation, gather information. And it's also, I think, important, like I'm talking about Bretton Woods, I'm a historian, I'm interested in geopolitics, that many of us who are into tech, who are engineers, that we also keep, you know, up to date with news, like the world situation, so that we don't end up with these like air castles that I often see a lot of naivety around what's possible, because, well, and you develop, and then we develop like beautiful technologies that can do X, Y, and Z and all that. However, how we implement them and how we get into these like social and political games will just, yeah, not work. So again, you know, like any integralist, like we need to think in all four quadrants, and that is easier if we team up with other metamodernly minded individuals, people on a high level of complexity, people who can serve the complexity out there, and who's got other skills than ourselves, and create what Hanzi in his latest book, 12 Commandments, called a meta team. Yeah, to find these meta team. And one of the most important things about a meta team is that friendship comes first. We know that already back, like from the ancient Greeks, that people who are good friends, know each other, fond of each other, they are incredibly good fighters. And I imagine that we need to do something like we should get to know each other out there. I would love to get to know many of you people there, and create like strong groups of friends, with the like-minded friends, with whom we can share perspectives, and where we have different skills, and then position ourselves into what Peter Seihan calls, like the end of the world is just the beginning, because it is ending. Yeah, like this version, like things are. It's not only like the climatic, like, which is bad enough. Climatic changes, but it's also like this demographic crunch, and it's again this mental health crisis. People are going bonkers. Governments are going bonkers. Yeah, because our brains, most people's brains and nervous systems, simply cannot handle this massive barrage of information and images and sounds, and which is being corrupted by, you know, dictatorships and crazy billionaires. And yeah.
So before we open up to comments from others, I think as there is a role probably of metamodern technologists in designing technologies to help people, for example, deal with that complexity, because that complexity is not going away just because the institution is transnationalized, you know, and that's where some of Vitalik Buterin's work actually really around defensive accelerationism really comes in. As like, but I totally agree that the actual and like to point back to this, like fundamentally, like who owns this stuff and where is actually the power is like a really important question.
UX designers, you know, like UX designers are gonna save us. Yeah, because like the UX, the user interface is like, it is the difference between salvation and madness. No, I'm not kidding. I'm
Yeah,
fucking
yeah,
not kidding. Kidding
No, it's
here.
these are important questions for all of our mental health. Okay, let's open up for questions and comments from the floor. So, George, you have a hand up.
Yes.
Hi, George.
I appreciate. Hi, Emil. I was just going to tell how much I appreciated your response to Stephen's questions about what can metamodern leaning folks do something about this whole conundrum and transnationalization perspectives. So you were telling about finding our tribe, finding our meta streams, and so building on that, what I would add to it is going back to something that you said earlier when you brought in the model of hierarchical complexity and the state that is organizing, that is capable of cross-paradigmatic in some sense, and the platform. So then I asked in the chat that do social movements have agency? And of course, the meta themes will become relevant from an evolutionary perspective when the metamodernism becomes a social movement. Of course, that implies a lot of people living in metamodern stage of being, but let's suppose that it will happen someday, maybe 10 years, 100 years, who knows. But the critical factor is what would it take for these teams and their networks of the meta teams to raise to the level up to the capacity of cross-paradigmatic complexity so that we can compete with capital, we can compete with state, and even if it's very far out, but what is present now is the possibility that we bring our attention to raising our capacity to deal with higher levels of complexity so that we can coordinate at higher levels of complexity, starting at where we are at now, where we are mostly just isolated individuals, some of us trying to reach out towards each other. But this is where I would like to focus my attention to, forming meta teams with the shared intention to raising our capacity to deal with higher levels of complexity. Do I completely off the wall?
Well, definitely. If you find the right people, you can experience what we call like a scaffolding effect. Yeah. Especially if people have different skills, different perspectives. And then the crucial ingredient that they have like a good mutual understanding. We can help each other understand an otherwise very complex reality. So kind of like see it as, you know, like like therapy groups 2.0, where instead of we sit there and talk about well, we can also do that, talk about our emotions, but we sit there with our dizzy heads and so, okay, let's try to tackle this this lack of meaning together and create create order out of what's otherwise chaos. Definitely just have to find the right people. However, you're talking about like cross-paradigmatic. Now, like when it comes to psychological complexity, like cross-paradigmatic, there's only 0.005% of the population, like a handful of geniuses in the world, who are able to function on that level of complexity. However, we can create institutions and mechanisms that can handle higher levels of complexity than any of the individual human beings. And what we're talking about here is again, I need to repeat that it's not about like a planetary state. Yeah, like in the same way that the kingdoms of 500 years ago, they were nothing like the states that we have today. Yeah. So again, when we should think about England or Denmark in the Middle Ages, we should think about a company in order to understand what it was. In the same way, when we should think about this, we talk about planetary governance. I don't like the word government. It's a completely different animal than when we think of a state. Yeah, and we are talking about structures and institutions capable at handling much higher complexity than any of the individual actors. And again, cross-paradigmatic that the problem with the planetary state is that it could only work if everyone had like the same paradigm, the same ideology, and so on. And that's not going to happen in a world where we are having populations and states on like different stages of development. Some are going to be like more religious, and some are going to be more secular. So what this entity should be able to handle is to handle different paradigms, and make sure that they are not on collision course. I don't know if it makes sense. We spent like 20 sessions in the former course on getting to this point.
Some of the numbers came to my mind. For example, like Facebook has 3 billion users. Like is that which? So it's almost just like we just need to like flip our way of looking at it from it. Oh, it's just a US registered corporation to like if we actually start looking at it already as like this like transnational institution, which like all we need to do is like change the governance so that it's like collectively controlled or like property of the commons rather than an individual. Then suddenly it's there. It's not like we need to build, it's not like we need to build up a platform so until it gets 3 billion users. It's just like it's there. It's just about changing the way that we understand it and look at it.
Exactly, because this idea that let's just create the good guy Facebook. You're not going to succeed. You're not going to succeed at creating the good guy Facebook, And okay, well, you might get people along in Stockholm and San Francisco and some other fancy pants, like hipsters, but you're not gonna get like all the people in Bangladesh to join your fucking hipster Facebook. Yeah, Facebook is there just as the French kingdom was there back in 1789. Yeah, and people thought, okay, we live in this in this incorporated group, and we are how many? I think there were like 26 million people, and like what, this doesn't work, so we're just gonna take over. Like, thank you for creating the Kingdom of France. We're gonna take over, cut off your head, and then create the Republic of France. And I'm thinking like something similar. Like, so thank you, and I mean, we don't need to cut off their heads. Like, we can just like equivalent today would be just like to send them out on like a luxury island, with a bunch of fluffers, and then and then you can have all the cars in the world and so on, but you just cannot run this. And like, sorry, Elon and everyone who wants to do like, no, you can't just like go in and like buy a Twitter or the equivalent of. It's just no. We're not gonna allow you to do that much damage. Like, are you aware like how insane it is that you have this autistic billionaire guy who just like bought with other people's money, bought like a well-renowned platform institution like Twitter, and then he got radicalized by his own algorithm and is now just like posting out right-wing propaganda like 50 times a day. Like he can't even see it. He's gotten so addicted to his own Like, it's so sick. Like, because I'm thinking like, okay, we have like all these, you have all the money in the world. You can do everything. And you choose to, I don't know, sit on your phone and tweet. Like, it's pretty
Powerful
bad.
stuff. Chris, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just have a question on just like, what are your thoughts on the importance of accessibility and exposure to like these ideas for like larger parts of the population? And I wanna just ask, like, do you share like views that like Wilbur talked about, like with like when a certain percent of the population reaches a level, then like it like kind of just takes over? I'm curious on those things.
It can take over. And again, like most people don't care about this conversation that we're having. Just like in France in 1789, it was like a Paris thing. Like most people just want to go about their life. Most people don't want to. And again, like, oh, should I get like super involved in what they put in ketchup? No, I just want the government to make me safe so there's no poison in the ketchup, right? And again, with these kind of things, that's actually the positive. You don't need to get everyone along. Yeah, you just and that's also how politics works. Yeah, we call it a democracy, but like, really, guys, like how much cracy, which means governing, does like how much governing does like the normal like Joe and Jane do? No. So of course, you need a critical mass of people, but it doesn't need to be like 50% of the population or something like that in order to make change happen.
So it does follow that accessibility and exposure is important, right, to get some amount of people, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, in a free debate, and I also see that, okay, you just need to have like enough bad news. People just need to be like sufficiently pissed off in order to give their government, a carte blanche, yeah, and just not stand in the way. And I think it's going to be pretty easy. I don't think we are going to have people out on the streets to protect Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg's property. I mean, no.
I think when I hear you speak of accessibility, Chris, I also think of just like and like the ways in which we could tell this story more broadly and in different ways. Like, I don't think that many people would be familiar with the story that Emil has told today about like the inevitable transnationalization of these big social media platforms. Although it's one that I have kind of heard before and kind of makes sense and to me and probably to a lot of you. But like, I wouldn't say it's like a very strong meme kind of out there otherwise. So I think it's an interesting question of like, yeah, what would be the next steps of actually spreading that story? And to the extent to which, and in the way that Emil's presented it, it actually has this like this hyperstitive quality. We'll be talking more about hyperstition in session 4, but like at the ways in which like the story, if we can tell a powerful story, the story it attains a life of its own, and like the story itself can help drive change in a certain direction. So yeah, looking forward to talking more about the ways in which we can do that, certainly in that final session.
We have a book planned called Outcompeting Capitalism, but ironically enough, we just need to get it financed. Because we're kind of low on cash here. So I also wanted to talking about me being a little bit low on cash. I am running some courses, so now I am shamelessly just gonna make a little ad. I'm running a course next month. It's called The 6 Hidden Patterns of History. We're gonna talk about this among other things, but I'm a historian, so we're gonna go all the way back. Basically talk about how we have arrived at this point in history. And I believe that makes you, like, if you know the historical patterns, it makes you much better at predicting the future. So, and that's also like, I'm a historian by trade, but in these circles, I would also, describe myself as a futurist.
Yeah, I've just posted a link to your course on the Telegram group, Emil.
Thanks.
So,
Thanks.
yeah, highly recommend that people consider signing up to that as a sequel to this course. Daniel, go ahead if it's short.
It's very brief. I'm just curious, Emil, when you're talking about that part of kind of building those filaments and those hubs of connection, real connection between people and the engagement that gives, what are you tracking as far as the interesting places where that's going on?
Online. Yeah.
Where
The
online?
problem is, you know, like you know the saying, being the only gay in the village. Well, it's like, you know, you can be the only metamodern in the metropolis, and yeah, it's happening online. In the previous course I ran, you know, there's a beautiful example of people like building a strong meta system, meta team, and they were located in 4 different countries. So it happens online. However, when things get traction online, it can lead to the event in real life. But it's not like in the old day where you had like the Frankfurt school or the Oxford school or something, and then people would go to this particular cafe and meet the others and hang around, you know, and smoke cigarettes and drink absinthe, and then that was the place where it was happening. It's just not happening like that today. People will meet each other
I'll
online.
offer something a bit more specific. So like on the Futurecraft site, we have this Friends of Futurecraft page. And these are some of the places that some online purely, some a mixture of online and offline, that I see these conversations happening. So if you haven't already like checked out that page on the Futurecraft site, and if you're not familiar with those organizations, like that could be one place to start. And that's about all we have time for today.
Yeah.
It
might happen. Yes. Regarding that question, it might happen here I live in Lund, university town in Sweden. It's like the Oxford or Cambridge of Sweden, depending on your, a friend of mine is currently building a house here. It's going to be 650 square meters. And everything can go wrong, you know, work permits and what I know. But at some point, we're going to have a place here in Lund where I hope we can build what I call like the ministry of creation. So to have this little metamodern hub. So,
Another place in Sweden is Thomas Brooks's project Lakefront. I just pasted a link in the Zoom chat, which is I've visited this property now. It's currently being renovated. But it's like 150 rooms, like right by a lake, just south of Stockholm. So I suspect that will become an important physical hub in the years ahead. Okay, as we wrap up, I just want to make you aware of some of the prep that I've brought together for next week. So next week, the title is Technological Metamodernism, Myth and Magic. So hoping you have time, if you haven't already, to listen to this amazing podcast on the Emerald by Josh Schrei. So you want to be a sorcerer in the age of mythic powers. I imagine a few people here have already caught that. If not, I'm happy for you, because you get to then listen to it and enjoy it for the very first time. I've collected some key chapters from Sophie Strand's book, The Flowering Wand, which is on like alternative or particularly kind of masculine archetypes, some of which, or the ones I've collected here, I think are kind of particularly relevant to our discussions around technology. There's this short video here on After School, like nice animated short on around the book, The Immortality Key, which is a kind of speculative, suggestive history of use of psychedelics, actually, but I think the video is quite good as background for the Eleusinian mysteries, because we're going to be speaking more about cults and guilds and so on in the next session as like a complement to state power or transnational power and transnational regulation. Like the Eleusinian mysteries certainly had like a very powerful influence on like a very influential section of Greek society for several hundred years, actually. So like, what was that about? And is there some role for something similar in shaping the debate around technology nowadays? And then, especially if you're not familiar with these concepts already, like Wetiko and Moloch two kind of overlapping but like related conceptions of like mythological bad guys that are like showing up in this age. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. And I guess that's about it for today. Thank you for your kind words, Daniel, in the chat. Emil, I hope you enjoyed yourself as well. And yeah, thanks for your contribution today. See you in the Telegram group, and then see you next week, everybody. Take care.